Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of the Pursuit 365 podcast with your host, Shelly Smee. Today, I'm going to discuss the exclusive buyer's agency agreement. This might be something that you're not aware of, although it has existed as a form and a way of working with buyers for quite a long time now. It has not been a mandatory form, say like a listing agreement you would need to sign to have your home appear on the MLS or have an exclusive listing to sell your home, but it's essentially the same thing. It is what I like to call a buyer's listing agreement, but we're not listing a property. We're actually getting the permission from our buyer to engage with them as a professional and be their designated agent for their real estate transaction in the role of the buyer's agent. Some of you might wonder why this is important, or may have never come across this. Either you're a first-time home buyer and you have not had the opportunity to enter into any kind of relationship with a realtor, or you've heard about this particular type of agency agreement or contract and have decided that because you didn't really want to be bound to one particular agent, that you weren't comfortable signing it. But I'm here to let everybody know, both consumers and realtors alike, that the exclusive buyer's agency agreement will be something that our regulator is looking at very closely to enact as a standard form for a more consistent practice across our industry. I would expect sometime in the next 12 months. They have been talking about it for a few years now as we become more and more regulated by our regulator, the BCFSA, that's the British Columbia Financial Services Authority. This is the regulating body for industries in finance, such as banking, insurance, such as your car insurance and home insurance, and of course, real estate. So with the heavier regulatory environment that we all work under now, I believe, in my opinion, it's come from a fact that having a real estate business, having a real estate practice as an entrepreneur, there's actually not a lot of oversight in our industry in general on individual practice standards for our agents. And this can mean that from agent to agent, you can have a very different experience. One of being very well taken care of and having all of your questions answered, to maybe even just meeting somebody for the first time at the front door of a building after having called them about a listing, or perhaps you've been referred to an agent through a friend or family member, which I find is also one of the better ways to interview and to find an agent. Today, when we're going to talk about the buyer's agency exclusive agreement, we're also going to understand that from the agent's point of view, working with buyers, unlike listings, which once you have a listing, you have a finite set of steps and a very standard practice on how to get your listing ready, how to launch your listing, what kind of marketing you're going to do for your listing, and how you're going to actually put that sales process in play. When you're working with a buyer, if you don't have a standardized way of working with buyers, or you don't actually follow the 10 minimum recommended steps of a buyer's agent from our regulator, you can find that working with buyer's agents can be very different from agent to agent. Everyone has their own style, and certainly agents that have a little bit more experience in the industry also perhaps have a standard of service that they have broken down into steps and have, almost an unfailing ability to give service in a consistent way to each client. I've found over the years that when I'm working with buyers, I have been a huge proponent of the buyer's agency exclusive contract because I feel that working with buyers is often can be time consuming. Not that it isn't going to be time consuming to find a home, but I want to know that people who I want to work with and who want to work with me, that we're both on the same page about our level of commitment to the process. When you go looking for a home, it is a very stressful experience. I think selling your home can also, of course, be stressful, but especially for first-time buyers, it's very, very, very new. The whole process of looking at properties, for many first-time home buyers, they will be looking at a condominium or some other attached, what we call attached type of property, i.e. it's part of a building or part of a townhouse development. It could be either a strata property, or what we call a strata is a condominium, or it could be some other form of land ownership, which we'll get into in probably our third segment. This is the first of 4 buyer segments that I'll be doing over the next few weeks. So, what is a realtor's obligation to their buyer client? Well, according to the BCFSA, those obligations have been broken down into 10 minimum requirements that I'll review here. And this is right off the buyer's agency exclusive contract. It is a form that is available to all agents through our web portal that hosts all of the documents for a transaction, whether it's a listing transaction or a buying transaction. So, as your buyer's agent, your agent should be able to help you identify desirable properties to acquire. They should assist you in locating properties available to view and consider. We call this putting a tour together. So maybe it's not like a rock star tour, but maybe it turns out to be a rock star tour because you end up finding a property that you really resonate with to make an offer on. But locating properties available to view and consider is just not up to the agent. And usually it is the core part of our job, and there are many different online tools that we can set up so that you see listings and get listings to look at. But it's also part of our job and part of your job as the buyer to make us aware of any properties that you might want to view, whether they're mysteriously found on Craigslist, or you heard that one of your neighbors in the building might be thinking of selling, or of course you're on one of the many hundreds of real estate websites that are available to you as a consumer. Your realtor is your portal to access for these properties. So it's great to have a rapport with your agent, that if you see any properties that are just out there in the domain, or maybe there's even a building that you like that has no current listings in it, the buyer's agency exclusive contract puts a mutual agreement with you and your agent that you will discuss any and all possibilities for your home. Number 3 is a preliminary investigation and timely information gathering. So your buyer's agent, when they're looking at properties through the MLS listing service, will also have access to the strata documents, to the title search, to the property disclosure statement, and any other number of documents that may be related to that home. With Strata, it becomes very, very important to understand that you're not just buying a condominium, that you're also buying the set of documents that will indicate how that building is managing its affairs. It will also indicate, in some instances, where people may or may not be getting along. When you read the minutes of a building, they can tell you a lot. And your realtor should be an expert at helping you understand what all of the documentation is for your building. Once we have gone to look at some buildings, we also want to give you some guidance and advice. So another very important question you should always ask a potential buyer's agent is for the neighborhoods that you're going to be looking in and for the price point that you are pre-qualified for, and we'll talk about that in the next session. What are the options for you? And your agent should be quite knowledgeable either geographically of the type of product and inventory that's available in the neighborhoods that you want to live, and or when you discuss a certain price point, they should have some general knowledge of what type of product and what neighborhoods might have that product in that price level. So understanding the inventory and understanding what market dynamics are in play is a very important skill set for the buyer's agent. When you view a number of properties in a row and it's a set of appointments, we call this going on tour. And setting up a tour does take some time, especially if properties are tenanted, we may not be able to see them right away. So your agent will want to have a good communication with you through the week. It's usually a good idea to agree ahead of time, what your communication style is going to be, whether you set up a WhatsApp chat or you text or you use different online tools to indicate to each other what type of listings you want to see. By Wednesday or Thursday, you should have a game plan for the weekend. Or conversely, if you work in a industry or job where weekends are not easy for you to get out and see properties, seeing properties in the evening is also an option for you as a buyer. But relying just on the open houses to go with your agent to see them, or going to see open houses just on your own without your agent knowing what you're doing cannot put your best foot forward. Should you see a property that you really like, it's very important that your agent has also seen it or is aware of it. Many of us do go on what we call preview tours or agents open houses throughout the week in different neighborhoods. There are often previews of new listings for us to go look at as agents and go learn the inventory because that's part of our job. So when it comes down to selecting the right property on which to make an offer, this is a really interesting point because sometimes your agent will have information about a property and will have spent enough time with you over the course of maybe a few weeks to know that the property that you've fallen in love with is either a great choice or might not be a great choice for you. Their role isn't to pick the property for you. Their role is to guide you to all of the elements about that particular property that will help you to make a decision if that's the right choice for you, both economically, neighborhood area-wise, and of course, again, on the overall, I would say, the overall outlook of the building, the overall personality of the building. If you think of a condominium building having a personality, is it prudent? Is it managed well? Does it look like things are kept up? Does it have an on-site manager? Is it EV ready? Is it older? Is it newer? There's a lot of different things to consider with stratas, and we're going to again, we'll do a deep dive on stratas in another segment. Number 6 is to prepare a legally binding contract of purchase and sale. So part of our team's process with our buyers is to have a preview meeting before we even decide or commit to work together, to just understand where our buyers at as far as their level of sophistication with legal contracts and with understanding the amount of paperwork, what we call paperwork, even though a lot of it's electronic now. There will be many documents to review. So it's good to have had an opportunity to look at what a contract of purchase and sale looks like and some of the other documents that come along with it much before you've actually made your offer. I certainly think that, if you work with an agent that isn't prepared to educate you through the process of what all these documents are and what they look like before you go to make your offer, you may not feel prepared to actually write an offer. So part of our process, and certainly the process that I've worked with over the last 28 years, is really trying to prepare the buyers for what's ahead by getting them comfortable with all of the documents that they will be presented with and will need to either initial or sign through the course of purchasing the property. The other part of preparing a legally binding contract of purchase and sale is understanding the different elements of the offer. Sometimes it's not always the highest price that wins. And we'll be going through that in section 4, in segment 4 of our buyers sessions here over the next few weeks. Negotiating favorable terms and conditions. This is number 7 on the list. Now, I've always contended that in order for a home to sell, it's one thing to put a listing on the market and put a lot of effort into marketing and presenting it in its best light, maybe doing some staging, all the activities of listing a property. But unless you have a willing buyer and seller that agree on a price and terms and conditions for that property, you don't have a sold listing. And certainly over the last 10 to 15 years, I'd say really from about 2010 onwards, we've been in a very heavily weighted in favor of the seller market. That has recently changed with the rapid increase in interest rates that we saw over the last 2 years. And I would say that we're in a balanced market. Balanced market in real estate jargon means that the amount of active listings to the amount of sales is pretty balanced. Either is the flow of inventory coming into the market that is absorbed by purchasers on a pretty even rate. What we are seeing to the benefit of buyers in this current summer market that we're in right now is that there is a lot of inventory that is not sold after 30 days. This is quite beneficial to buyers right now. This is the first time, I think, in 15 years where, in general, buyers have a little bit more time to consider their purchase. But if you have an agent that is not able to be a strong negotiator on your behalf, that is really something that is a key element of being a buyer's agent, or I mean, you have to be able to negotiate as a listing agent as well. But I think in this environment where the buyers have a little bit more leverage than they have in the past 15 years, you want a strong negotiator. You want somebody who knows the inventory and is going to do a buyer's market analysis for you as you're writing your offer, to really understand that the price that you're submitting for the property is backed up by some data. Sometimes I've seen what I call pin the tail on the donkey offers through the last 10 years, where we just had no idea where the market would end up, because there seemed to be people that were willing to pay whatever they needed to pay to get the property. And I think unfairly, it was a misnomer out in the world that somehow realtors were encouraging people to make high prices. That may or may not be the case, but if somebody's willing to pay the price that they're willing to pay, and the seller is willing to agree to that price and terms and conditions, then you end up with a sold property. So one of the other things that is on here is number 8 is assisting in finding suitable financing, or assisting the buyer in locating suitable financing. There are some agents that are also licensed as mortgage brokers. I would actually highly dissuade you from using the same mortgage broker as buyer's agent, because I think really good mortgage brokers are really good mortgage brokers because that's 100% of their business and what they do. Really good agents are really good agents because that's 100% of their business and it's what they do. There may be the odd unicorn out there that can do a really good job of both things, but most people start with their bank. And the next session we're going to do on this buyer's agency group of sessions will talk about the first step. And the first, I think, probably 4 steps to purchasing a property. But certainly a lot of people will start with their financial institution that may already be familiar with their position, where they have their money held, before going to a broker. Other people start right away with a mortgage broker, having them negotiate the best rate for their personal situation. But I can also just say, tip number 1 here, do not go and buy a car or a large big ticket item before you apply for a mortgage, or any time up till and including when you close on your new home. Keeping your credit score as high as possible gives you a more favorable rate with the lender, and it also keeps your debt service ratio low. And again, you can always watch one of my sessions with Rima Zeno, who's an amazing mortgage broker. I believe she was our first guest on the session way back when. But having your financial fitness, having a checkup on your financial fitness is really what your agent is expecting that you will have done, even before deciding on which realtor you're going to work with. Number 9 is assisting your clients in arranging property inspections and other needed services. This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use whichever ancillary professional your agent suggests, but it is a good idea to do your own research for lawyers, accountants. You might need accounting advice if you're going to buy the property in your company, or you have some other kind of estate planning or other issues, or ways that you want the property to be held, getting a lawyer, having accounting advice, and of course property inspections and or other specialty inspectors that may be required. We have access to those, but we also encourage our clients to check out a few options and pick the one that's best for them. There are many cases where our clients will just say, hey, can you just tell us the name of an inspector? For when the market is quite busy, a lot of the time through our 3 or 4, sometimes 5, inspectors that we really trust and we know do a great job and have a great report product that's easy to read and are, thorough. It might just depend on who's available on the day that you actually want the inspection done. So think of your real estate agent as being your collaborator with regard to choosing the other professionals that you'll need along the way. And last but not least, number 10 is assisting in the completion and possession process. So what this means is that when you go to get the keys for your home, I know that on our team, we always do a walkthrough of the property the day before with just ourselves or the other agent. If the other agent is not going to be available to us to hand us the keys and walk through the property with us at the possession day and time, I always like to have a look at the property before possession to make sure any items or anything that we expect to be a certain way on the possession day are actually that way. So there you go. According to your BCFSA regulator, what they expect of a buyer's agent is these 10 items, and they are on the front page of the buyer's agency exclusive contract. One of the other things that I think people misunderstand about this buyer's agency exclusive contract is that you can't get out of it, that you're bound to work with your clients for forever. That is not true. So just like a listing agreement, there'll be a term of service in the buyer's agency contract. Usually we contract with our buyers for about 6 months, but quite often, realistically, if somebody's ready to buy a property now, the inventory changes over quite quickly, and it could be that we, spend 2 or 3 or 4 weeks with them, maybe 6, maybe 8. It really does depend on what their needs are and what the time of the year and how much inventory that matches their criteria is actually available. When you review the buyer's agency agreement, you will note that there's a lot of language in it that is very similar to some other forms, disclosure forms that your agent will have provided to you, hopefully, before you've started talking about your bargaining position or anything to do with providing those agency services. And those are the forms that are consumer-based forms. They don't actually form a contract or obligation, and they are the privacy disclosure form and the form we used to call working with a realtor, but it's actually now the form that is called the disclosure of representation and trading services form. It has a very long name. I actually had to get my brain around that for a moment. So those two forms, the disclosure of representation and trading services and the privacy notice and consent form, those do not form an agency agreement. Those are just consumer forms that have been provided to explain to the consumer what the role of the realtor is in that particular instance. So when you actually compare the language on those two forms to the language in the actual agreement, it is quite similar. But the buyer's agency agreement is taking that language and making it into a contractual format. So one of the things, number 6 on the buyer's brokerage remuneration, and that just means what your agent's going to get paid. This is an area that is very also misunderstood, because there is an assumption, I guess you could say, that the listing agent or the seller is going to pay the buyer's agent. And through the magic and cooperation of the multiple listing service, most listings will have a cooperating commission that is in an acceptable range for your buyer's agent. So, in fact, the listing of the properties that you're looking at to buy, the listing by the listing agent will include a portion of the total commission that they're charging to the seller will be offered to the buyer's agent. And buyer's agents have the ability to print out a page to give you for every listing you go to look at that has the disclosure of the amount of commission offered. And if that amount of commission offered to the buyer's agent is different than the commission that they have agreed to work for, bring it to your attention. So it's not rocket science. The buyer's agents are actually paid by the buyer, because if the buyer doesn't buy the property, then the seller doesn't owe any commission to their listing agent. But the proceeds of the sale are usually what's going to pay the commissions. So the idea that it's just the seller who's paying the commission is actually technically not correct, because the commission will come out of the proceeds of the sale, of which the buyer is the trigger on a completion of a transaction for your agent to get paid. There are many different business models in real estate. And quite frankly, I'm not allowed, and I shouldn't ever say that there is a standard fee, because everything's negotiable. And if your buyer's agent can't explain to you how they get paid and what they expect to be paid for their efforts in assisting you, then I would suggest you move on to one who can. Because if they can't even negotiate their own commission, how are they going to negotiate for you? And that's kind of the attitude I have towards that. None of us wants to work for free. None of us wants to, do something we love and not be compensated for it. I've had many people over the years just assume that, I'm going to work with them, even though they're not willing to commit to working with me. Earlier in my career, that was something that was much more normal, was that you would have all these buyer's agents running around, and every now and then you'd bump into what you thought was your client out with another agent showing them properties. And or sometimes you'd work for quite a while with a particular buyer, only for them to feel guilty that their brother-in-law just got their real estate license and they had to write the deal with them. But when it comes right down to it, I believe that as a professional, I want all cards to be on the table, and there has to be a level of trust. I trust that my clients that I work with are going to disclose the correct information that I need to be able to help them make prudent decisions. And they trust that I am going to do the legwork and I am going to guide them as to the best of my ability to the home that's going to work for them. So although we have a lot of trust and the relationship is based on trust, having a buyer's agency agreement in place also sets out some legal issues and some legal concepts around agency that should not be overlooked. One of those concepts is under the conflict of interest. Conflicts of interest can arise in agency relationships where you may not be able to act on behalf of your client should certain instances arise. The most common one that can happen for a buyer's agent is having two buyers interested in the same type of properties. You should have discussion with your buyer's agent of how they handle conflicts of interest if it is going to arise, but it's Section 8 in your buyer's agency agreement. And it's very well defined that your buyer's agent can work with other buyers that are in the same market area and are perhaps even interested in the same types of properties, but they owe you a duty to let you know if they also have another buyer that wants to make an offer on the exact same property as you. And they should have a way of explaining to you which client they're going to keep working with. This doesn't happen very often, but it's certainly something that should be questioned of any buyer's agent that you decide to work with. How do they handle a conflict of interest? And last of all, one never hopes that you need to fire a client or that a client wants to fire you. But if for some reason you need to get a different agent, please have the courtesy to let your agent know that this is not working out or you don't feel that it's working out before you start working with another agent. This is just common courtesy, if nothing else, but this is also the hesitation why some consumers don't want to get into a buyer's agency agreement. But I think, if you think of it like being involved in perhaps a lawsuit and you wouldn't go to your opponent's lawyer and ask them to also represent you because they're going to be in court that day. That's maybe not the best analogy, but that comes down to why we don't have listing agents representing buyers anymore. A number of years ago, I believe it was 2017 now, which is holy smokes, it seems like yesterday, but I guess it's 7 years now. We used to have something called limited dual agency, and that was when the listing agent could also represent the buyer, and it meant that their duties to both parties became limited. This was always problematic from the actual law of agency standpoint, whereby your agent is supposed to be your sole agent, your sole representative, and they have a fiduciary duty, what I like to call the F word of real estate. They have a fiduciary duty to represent you and you only and your best interests. So that was very problematic in our industry for quite some time, and it was eliminated so that if you actually go into a listing as a buyer, 9 times out of 10, they will insist that you have your own buyer's agent, and this is so that they can fully represent their seller. They will need the seller's permission to represent a buyer, if the buyer decides that they do not want any representation. The most likely type of client I've seen come in, or consumer, I guess, because they're not a client until they actually become a client, i.e., they sign a buyer's agency agreement with you. But the most likely type of consumer that will not want to have representation of an agent tends to be builders, developers, because they're, somewhat sophisticated and or buying and selling properties all the time, and they tend to know their way around the transaction, or often lawyers. Don't ask me why, but I guess they just figure they can do it themselves. I do believe that it is in the best interests of everyone to have their own full and separate representation, not just because it's my job, but because I believe in the law of agency. It's the best way for consumers to be protected in a transaction. A lot of people don't necessarily realize that your agent has to pay into what's called the errors and omissions fund. And it means that if your agent is found liable of not providing one of those 10 services as a bare minimum, and or not performing their duties to the full level of the expectations of the profession, when something goes sideways in a real estate deal, it is often the realtor that will be the first line of getting sued. So really, when people choose to use realtors either for buying or selling, they're also shifting the majority of risk of the transaction to the professional. Again, when you look at the analogy for going to court, if you represent yourself in court, you had better know your way around the law. That is the same with real estate. If you decide to represent yourself in a real estate transaction, you should know your way around a contract of purchase and sale, and certainly have some experience in negotiating. If you decide to represent yourself and you want the listing agent to write your contract, you better understand exactly what you need to tell them, because they are not allowed to write the contract for you. They need to take direction from you and write word for word what you tell them. So any of the standard clauses that your buyer's agent would normally use are not available to an unrepresented party. So there you go. Those are the top 10 expectations of what you could expect working with a buyer's agent. They would identify desirable properties for you to acquire. They would locate those properties to view and consider. They would do preliminary investigation and timely information gathering for you. They would view the properties and provide guidance and advice for each of the homes. They would help you to select the right property to make an offer on and understand what other comparable properties may have sold for to help guide you to a price that you would offer for that property. They would prepare the legally binding contract of purchase and sale and explain all areas of the contract to you and what your obligations would be under that contract. They would assist in negotiating favorable terms and conditions. They would assist in seeking suitable financing. They would assist in arranging your property inspections and other needed services. And they would assist in the completion and possession process. And very exciting day for a buyer's agent is handing over those keys and seeing your smiling face in your brand new home. I hope you've enjoyed my first segment on buyer's agency and working with a buyer's agent. I'll be doing 3 more in the next 5 or 6 weeks. We have a few other guests that will be coming on over the next few weeks. And if you have any questions or you want to book a complimentary appointment with me, feel free to give me a call or click on the link in the body of the text under this podcast. Hope you have a great week. And if you like this podcast and you'd like to see more, please click subscribe, and we'll see you next Friday. Thank you.